So welcome to today's session. Today we'll be looking at how to replicate your search across databases. So we'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are hosting this online session from the lands of the Awabakal people. We would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands within the university footprint areas, the Awabakal, Darkinjung, Biripi, Worimi, Wonnarua and Eora nations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing culture and connections. We would also like to extend this acknowledgement and pay our respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. So these researcher and HDR workshops have been created and presented by the research liaison librarians. So you can see here that there are 4 research liaison librarians, and we each support different schools. So if after the session you have any more questions or would like to arrange an appointment to meet one of the librarians, visit the research support section on the library website to find the appropriate research liaison librarian for your school and to make contact with them. So in today's session, we'll be looking at why you need to replicate a search and things that you can do at the beginning to make this process easier down the line. So the main part of today's session will be showing you what the components of your search strategy are, as these are the things that you'll need to recognize and change to suit whatever database you're searching in. So the schools that I support are in the health discipline. So I help people with their search strategies for their systematic review. So this session will be from that perspective. We'll be focusing on some of the main databases used in a sort of a health systematic review. We'll be looking at databases in the OVID platform, Medline, EMBASE and PsycINFO. And we'll also be looking at CINAHL, Scopus and Web of Science. So we'll also look at some of the library resources and other online tools that you can use to help you when replicating your search. So why do you have to replicate a search? So as part of your research, generally it's good practice, it's good scientific practice to get information from as many places as possible so you can demonstrate the breadth of the information that exists on your topic. To keep the research consistent and uniform, it's important that the search remains as close to the other searches as possible, so you know you're bringing in that similar research. This keeps the integrity and accuracy of the research intact. If you're doing a review, a literature review, scoping review, and particularly a systematic review, it's required that you look at more than one database as you're attempting to review all of the information that exists on a particular topic. This is why some reviews also include grey literature and material that's not published or indexed in a traditional sort of research database, as this shows all the material on that topic. So for a systematic review, it's not uncommon for 3 to 5 or more databases to be searched. This is why it's important at the beginning of your research project or your systematic review to begin to document the process as much as possible. So this includes saving your search strategies along the way. It's good research practice. You can go back to previous searches if you need to change the scope of the research, and it saves time as you don't have to start from the beginning every time you want to run a search. So also as part of a review, it's a requirement that you save and document your search strategy so you can demonstrate what terms were used and how the research was found. This makes the process transparent. And it also allows other researchers to replicate the search if they're interested in the same area of research. It's also useful if you're conducting an updated review, an updated systematic review. Sometimes people go back to revisit the topic and find information that has come out since the original review. By documenting the search strategy, researchers can simply run that search from the last date it was ran to bring in new information. So there is no definitive way to document a search strategy. you definitely need to find a way that suits you. Most people have their search strategies saved to a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. All of the library databases allow you to save your search after creating an account with the database. So start this practice as early as possible. Come up with a naming convention that makes sense and is clear so you can refer to whatever search you need where necessary without confusion. So here is an example of a search strategy from Medline. This is one of the databases in OVID. So we'll be looking at what you would need to do, what you would need to look for to replicate this search across the different databases: EMBASE, PsycINFO, CINAHL, Scopus, and Web of Science. When you're doing a systematic review, I know for the health disciplines, generally we recommend that people test out the search strategy in one database first. For the health subjects, it's generally Medline. You'll run that search in that database first and then replicate the search across the databases. So this is why we're going from Medline across to the other databases. So I've taken this search and broken it down into the different elements we'll be looking at and that you'll need to consider when you're changing your search. So we'll go through these components one by one. So to begin with, you'll need to look at subject headings. So in an OVID search, subject headings are identified by the / at the end of the term. So subject headings are mainly used, in medical, scientific sort of subject-based databases. So it's important to remember that different databases use different subject headings. So you must always check that the subject headings are the same. If they're different, swap out the different terms so they're the most accurate to your original search. So even across the OVID databases, across Medline, EMBASE, and PsycINFO, they use different subject headings. So you'll just need to double check that they are the same subject heading. So if we go across to Medline, so all of these databases are available through the library site. If you go to the library homepage, scroll down to your list of databases, enter in the database name and go through these links here, you'll be able to have access. So we can see here, we're looking at Medline. So our subject heading for cancer is neoplasms. So you would need to double check that it's the same subject heading. So I'll just give you an example. If I enter in neoplasms in Medline, it will try and look for a subject heading that matches. So we can see here there's a broader list. And there's our original subject heading. So if we go back and we change our database to EMBASE, enter in the same term, we can see here that it hasn't come up with the same broad list. It's come up with just the one subject heading. So we can already see that it's a little bit different. It doesn't have the plural. And this is where you could also check to see in the scope, does the definition mean the same thing? If not, you would need to find a subject heading that matches it. You can also go into the list. And we can see here the broader list of terms for neoplasms as well. Other term we could look at is early detection of cancer. If we go back to our search and we enter in the same term, we can see here it's changed it to early cancer diagnosis. So you can't just assume that you can copy paste the same terms and run it, because we can see here we've got different terms. So you'll need to double check that they're the same. So for CINAHL, we'll do the same thing. So to find subject headings in CINAHL, you can do it a couple of different ways. You can tick to suggest subject terms. You can go to the subject headings here. And same thing, you just want to double check, is there the same subject heading? So we can see here neoplasms. And if we add it to our search, what you can see here is that where OVID has a / at the end of the term, CINAHL has included MH at the beginning of the term. So that's what their way of saying that this is a subject heading, it's a medical heading. So you can see that each different database will have a different, language of how they interpret different components of the search. So for the subject heading in CINAHL, it's MH. So this is something as well you need to think about when you're documenting and saving your search across the different databases, that there's a different vernacular and different terms used. So this is for databases that have subject headings. Multidisciplinary databases like Scopus and Web of Science don't have subject headings as they cover a wide array of subjects. So for those databases, we just have to focus on making the other keywords match as closely as possible. So we always recommend that you have a mixture of keywords and subject headings in the search. So if you don't have a subject heading as a keyword already in your search, make sure you include a keyword search that matches the subject heading in your Web of Science or your Scopus search. Next up, we have our search fields. So anywhere that's not a subject heading, that term is considered a keyword search. So the search field relates to where that keyword search is going to be looked at across the record of a particular article. So you can see here in our Medline search, the language that they use is .mp, which stands for multi-purpose. So this particular search of a keyword will look across the title, the abstract, and the keywords provided by the author or the publisher in the record of the article in Medline. So from here on out, in terms of all the other components of the search, if you're going across any of the OVID databases, so if you're going across from Medline to EMBASE to PsycINFO, the good news is that all the different elements, all the different components of the search are the same from here on out across the databases. So all you would need to do is to copy your keywords and pop them in the search fields and run the search. So your phrase searching, your wildcards, truncation, and adjacency filters are all the same. So just copy those across the OVID databases, save the results for each database, and document the search strategy for these as well. So for the other databases, you'll need to check where the keyword terms will be searched in order to replicate that. So if we have a look at CINAHL and we enter in our keyword term cancer, we can see here that next to the search box, select a field, a drop-down box is available. If we just run this search without selecting anything, CINAHL's default keyword search is a little bit different to OVID. It looks across the title, the abstract, and the subject headings. So if you enter in the term, we can see here that it's given no .mp, it's got no search field terminology to go on with it. So it will just look like this. So even though that includes the subject heading in its default search, I would still recommend including the subject headings separately just to cover your bases. If you wish to change the result, the default, we enter in our term and select a field. We can see that the next one is all text. So this doesn't refer to all text as in the full text of the article. It just means all the text in the database. So if we run this search, we can see here it's added TX for all text next to it. And you can see here where we've just used our default, we've got around 519,000, whereas for all text of the database, it's included around 880,000. So you can see, but by bringing in all the text of the database, it's bringing in a bigger result. So I would probably leave it to the default because this could include things like the journal title and things like that that you don't need to include in your search. So you can also see in the drop down that title, abstract options. In the OVID databases, it allows you to combine your search fields together, so you can do title and abstract together. In CINAHL, you can't do that. You would have to run all the words as title and all the words as abstract and combine them together with OR, so it's a little bit more tricky. So if you need to do that, that will take a bit of time, and you can definitely liaise with your research librarian if you have any questions about that. So if we go to Scopus for our keyword search, you can see straight up, it will tell you it's looking across the article title, the abstract, and the keywords. So if I enter in our keyword and hit search, you can see here that its language is title, abs, key is what it will put next to the search term. So just something to think about if you're documenting your search across, this is what that term will look like. Again, you can change that. It has things like author, article title, abstract, keywords. So the article title, abstract, and keywords is as closest to the .mp search in OVID. So now if we go across to Web of Science, just get rid of these pop-ups. We enter in our term, and for Web of Science, what it will do is it will, give an explanation of where it's looking. So its default is all fields. So it searches across the searchable fields. So it's like the all text in CINAHL. So if we hit the search for this one, we can see here that it uses the vernacular, it puts all fields in brackets at the end. So you can see here we've got over 4 million results for that one. If we change this, we scroll down and have a look at topic, it searches the title, abstract, author keywords. So this is the one that will be closest to the keyword search in OVID. We can see here that's cut down the results down to just under 3 million. And we can see here that after cancer, it's put the word topic in brackets at the end. So that's its vernacular. Next up, we have our phrase searching. So anything bigger than one term, so one word. So we can see here we have old age, older adult, older patient, older population. So within OVID, it will look for that phrase together. But in other databases, if you don't include your phrase in quotation marks, it will look for those terms singularly, not together. So you'll need to make that change across the different databases. So this is where, if you're documenting your search, it'll come in handy, as you can sort of make that change, add those inverted commas before you try your search in another database. So this information, the difference in searches, can also be found in a quick search guide for health databases that we have on our systematic review LibGuide. So if we go to the library page, go to researcher support. Oh, that's not good. I don't know what's happening with our website. Let me see if I have a copy of.
I've put a link to it in the chat.
Oh, okay, yes. Awesome. Let me copy that link. Thanks, Jennifer. He's hoping it works. Oh, cool. So we've got this guide that looks at some of the more popular health databases, gives you a look at the coverage of all the databases, and it also tells you the different ways of how to search in those databases. So we can see here for phrase searching, which is what we're looking at now. You can see here across the OVID databases that defaults to a phrase search. For CINAHL, we need to include our phrase in inverted commas. For Scopus, we need to do the same, and we need to do the same for Web of Science. So I'll just give you an example. If we put older patient without the inverted commas, we've got this amount of results, 915,000. And if we do this with inverted commas, we've got less because it's looked for that phrase together rather than individual terms. So as I mentioned before, if you're documenting your search, which you should be doing, it comes in handy that you do that for your phrase searches beforehand, and that makes it easier to copy and paste them across into your search. So next up, where we've highlighted here, this is our truncation. So our asterisks are our truncation symbol. So these look for any variants of that word from the truncation symbol onwards. So all this information that is located on our quick search guide, you're also able to find this information wherever there's a help button, a question mark in the databases themselves. It'll have this information. So we can see in our guide here for truncation, for CINAHL, we can include an asterisk, the symbol is the same. For Scopus, it says that word variants are automatically found without a truncation symbol, but you can include one to sort of force it. So I would definitely leave it. And the same thing for Web of Science, in that you can include an asterisk as the same truncation symbol. But it's always just good to double check to make sure you're following. Next up, where we've highlighted here, we've included a wildcard. So this will swap out an individual, swap out a letter. This is good for things like spelling variations. So aging, it will look for the spelling of aging with an E and without an E. So always, again, just good to check across the guide. Are our wildcards the same? So in CINAHL, we use a question mark. For Scopus, a question mark, and for Web of Science, a question mark. So we can keep that the same across those as well. Next up, we have our adjacency or our proximity searches. So this will look for terms within a certain number of words of each other. So in our guide, we can see this is where things get a little bit different. So whereas OVID uses the term adjacent, CINAHL uses the near operator. So you would need to include N and the number that you were looking at. So for our particular search, we're looking for cancer and 3, and I'll just choose one of the words, screening. So that's our search come up there. For Scopus, it has 2 different options. So if you need to have words in a certain order, they will do precede. So you can have one particular term needs to precede all the other terms within a certain amount of number. And they also have within. So this will look for the terms preceding and after. It will alternate. And Web of Science, their term is near. So you need to make sure you make those changes. Again, this is where documenting helps. You can type these terms out before you pop them into the database. So last up, we have our filters and our limits. So we can see here on this particular search, this person has limited their search to they only want resources in the English language, and they're only looking at information from 2011 to today. So for simple limits like this, year, language, this shouldn't be a problem to replicate across the databases. But if you're limiting by things like the subject headings and the things like human or animal, if you only want, human studies based using humans, this is a little bit more difficult to translate to a database like Scopus or Web of Science, as they don't have that same filter. So they just look for those terms as a keyword to limit by. So this is where you have to think about if you want to include this filter across all the databases, how it would affect the results. Would you be able to, if you wanted to remove the filter, would you be able to screen without this filter? You might have to leave it off the multidisciplinary databases, your Scopus and Web of Science, because they can't bring in those same results, but leave it on your OVID and Medline database, your OVID database searches. But you'll just need to be prepared for the ones where you don't have the limit. You might have to screen through a few more results. So again, this is where documenting along the way helps, as you can justify your reasons why you've made these decisions. So for our simple limitations like language and year, we would do this across the filters to the side for CINAHL. So we can enter in 2011. And pop in the language as well. only looking at English. So we can see here it's done this for the last line. And that's how it's displayed those filters, the limiters. So for Scopus, our filters are down the left-hand side. And our language is in the drop down here. So you can see it's a little bit trickier for Scopus because they include such a large amount of resources. The same thing for Web of Science as well. Our limitations, our filters are down the side as well. So for those sort of easy to reach filters, it's easy to replicate it across the databases. But if you have anything a little bit more complex that might not be easily translated across your Scopus and Web of Science, contact your research liaison librarian and we can talk you through some of your different options. So to recap, these are the things you'll be looking for. So we've got our different symbols across our OVID databases and what they mean. So you'll need to look at your subject headings. You'll need to look at if they're the same even across the OVID databases. And you'll also need to think about if there are no subject headings in a particular database, what you can do to replicate those same terms. For the keywords, you need to think about, are you using phrase searches? So are you using anything that's bigger than one word? Does it need to be included in inverted commas? You'll need to think about, are the keywords being looked across in the same areas as they are in your previous database search? Are all the symbols the same? Your wildcard, your truncation, is your adjacency or your proximity search going to be the same? And then you need to think about if you've got any limits. Can you replicate those limits across the databases? If not, is there a way that you can exclude them or include it for some and not the others? So I definitely, to go through this process, I would draft the terms with their changes and then sort of run the search line by line and topic by topic in the database so that it's clear and you can see that you've replicated the search appropriately. Then definitely save the searches. So as I mentioned, there's that quick search guide to health databases. We've also got access to what's called a search polyglot tool. That's part of a bigger tool that was created by Bonn University for systematic reviews. So we can see here, Jennifer's popped the link in the chat. So we can see here that there is a search translator. So if you have it blank, you can click here and it will give you an example of what you need to pop into the main query box. So first of all, you can only include a PubMed or a Medline query in the box to translate it across to the other databases. So if we click here, it'll give you an example. So you can see here, this one is a PubMed search. It doesn't have / at the end of the headings. It's got, the mesh in brackets at the end. I have, if you have a sort of larger search that's a bit more complicated, this is a good tool to use. I still find it difficult to use because you need to get the query correct in the initial stages for it to translate across the different databases. Sometimes this can be tricky and sometimes this can take just as much work documenting beforehand and popping it in this query as it does, looking sort of the more manual way. And I think that taking you through the different components of the search, you'll need to know those components anyway when you're, so you can recognize if there's any issues with your search. So by all means, have a play with this tool. And if you have any questions or, you know, it's not working for you, feel free to contact your research liaison librarian. But we can see across, for this example, our PubMed example, if you hit the drop down for the other searches, you can see that it's translated our thyroid neoplasm subject headings into our Medline subject headings, because you can see the / at the end of it. And we can see our CINAHL search. It's converted to the medical headings and the different terms. So it's just another thing for you to think about, particularly if you have a very large search strategy it's useful for. But that is it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Jennifer's just put a link to our survey. The survey will get sent to you in an email at the end of the session as well. If you could just fill it out when you have a chance, give your feedback, pop in any ideas for any future sessions. We'd really appreciate it. And we've got a few more sessions coming up for our researcher and HDR workshops. So again, if you're interested in attending, we've got one looking at our special collections and GLEM-X lab. That is on the Thursday, the 22nd of September. We've got one coming up for advanced EndNote. So they will show you some tips and tricks when using EndNote in Word. And we've got one coming up for data management. So if you're interested in those, please feel free to register via the library website. But yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your research liaison librarian. But if no one has any more questions, I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks everyone for attending, and you will get the recording of this session afterwards. Thank you.